The room froze in a single breath. Phones stopped buzzing, assistants stopped typing, and a billionaire CEO, known for calm control, looked genuinely panicked. Viktor Holov, the powerful head of a global energy company, stood inside a luxury hotel conference room moments away from sealing a multi-billion-dollar deal with Russian investors. There was only one problem: the Russian translator hadn't arrived. Flights delayed. Calls unanswered. The investors had already taken their seats, their expressions growing colder by the second. Contracts lay open on the table, time was bleeding away, and Viktor knew one wrong move could collapse years of negotiation. Every executive in the room avoided eye contact, hoping someone, anyone, would fix the impossible situation. The air felt heavy, tight, and unforgiving. This was the kind of moment where empires cracked. Viktor adjusted his cufflinks, a habit he only had when stress crept in, and forced a polite smile that fooled no one. He tried filling the silence with small talk, praising the hotel, commenting on the city, even joking about jet lag, but the words fell flat. The Russian investors exchanged looks, their whispers sharp and impatient, signaling disrespect more than delay. Viktor's assistant leaned closer, voice barely audible, admitting the backup translator was still hours away. Viktor's chest tightened. Billions weren't just numbers here, they were factories, jobs, futures, all hanging by a thread of language. He thought about the months of preparation, the private flights, the endless negotiations, and felt the unthinkable creeping in: failure. The kind that headlines remember. The kind that boards don't forgive. His eyes scanned the room desperately: lawyers, analysts, executives, brilliant minds rendered useless without words to bridge the gap. Sweat formed at his temples as seconds dragged into painful minutes. One investor closed his folder halfway, a silent warning. Another checked his watch and sighed. Viktor cleared his throat, ready to postpone the meeting, knowing postponement meant collapse. At the edges of the room, hotel staff moved quietly, trying not to be noticed, cleaning glasses, adjusting chairs, existing only as background. Viktor barely saw them. His focus tunneled on the table, the contracts, the shrinking window of opportunity. The silence grew louder than any argument, pressing against him, exposing a truth no one wanted to admit: power meant nothing without understanding. And just as Viktor opened his mouth to speak words that would end everything, the moment stretched thin, so thin it felt like it might shatter. Viktor tried to stall, smiling too long, offering coffee, making jokes that didn't land. The Russian delegates whispered among themselves, clearly unimpressed, their body language stiff and closed. One of them leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, while another slowly tapped a pen against the table, each sound echoing like a countdown. His assistant leaned in and whispered the truth: without a translator, the meeting would end in minutes. Viktor's mind raced. He had faced market crashes, ruthless competitors, and hostile takeovers, but this felt worse because it was silent, slow, and humiliating. Language wasn't just words, it was trust, respect, and understanding. And right now, he had none of it. He could feel control slipping through his fingers, replaced by helplessness. As tension built, the air in the room seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Lawyers flipped pages nervously, executives stared at their tablets without reading, and no one dared speak. In the corner, a quiet figure moved near the back of the room, a hotel maid, dressed simply, pushing a cleaning cart. No one noticed her except to step around her as if she were invisible. She kept her head down, polishing a glass, wiping a table, listening as voices rose and frustration spread like fire. Viktor rubbed his temples, knowing the deal, and his reputation, were slipping away together. He imagined the headlines, the boardroom silence, the questions he wouldn't be able to answer. One of the Russian investors muttered something sharply in his language, his tone unmistakably irritated. Viktor caught the emotion but not the meaning, and that made it worse. He nodded as if he understood, hoping confidence might mask confusion. It didn't. The investor's patience thinned further, and one of them began gathering his documents, a subtle but devastating signal. Victor's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He thought about postponing, about apologizing, about retreating, but retreat felt like surrender. In moments like this, he realized, wealth and status offered no protection. Without communication, he was powerless. Around him, the room felt divided by an invisible wall of language, thick and unbreakable. The maid paused near the doorway, her hands tightening on the cart handle as she listened. Her expression shifted, not curiosity, but recognition. Victor didn't see it. He was too busy staring at the table, counting breaths, searching for a miracle he didn't believe would come. The final second stretched painfully long, and just as Victor prepared to speak the words that would officially end the meeting, the tension reached its breaking point. Then it happened. Soft at first, almost hesitant, a calm voice spoke in perfect Russian. "If you'll allow me," the voice said politely, "there's been a misunderstanding." Every head snapped toward the sound as if pulled by a string. The maid stood still near the back of the room, hands folded in front of her, posture straight, eyes steady and respectful. For a brief second, no one spoke. The words had landed too cleanly, too confidently, to be ignored. She continued speaking, fluent, precise, measured, addressing the investors directly, not interrupting, not over-explaining, but choosing each phrase with care. Shock rippled through the room like a sudden change in temperature. The Russian delegates straightened in their chairs, surprise flickering across their faces before turning into focused attention. Victor stared, stunned, his mouth slightly open, unable to process what he was witnessing. The maid calmly explained the delay, offering a culturally appropriate apology that acknowledged respect rather than weakness. She clarified a financial point that had caused tension, reframing it in terms that aligned with the investors' expectations and priorities. Her tone carried authority without arrogance, humility without fear. She translated Victor's intentions not just word for word, but meaning for meaning, capturing nuances no app, no rushed translator, and no unprepared executive ever could. The room began to change. Shoulders relaxed. Pens stopped tapping. One investor nodded slowly, another leaned forward with interest. Questions were asked, and answered, smoothly, confidently, without confusion. Victor felt the panic drain from his body, replaced by disbelief and relief. He watched as the deal he thought was lost slowly stitched itself back together, sentence by sentence. One of the Russian investors even smiled, a small but powerful gesture that shifted the entire atmosphere. What moments ago felt like collapse now felt like connection. The air no longer pressed down, it lifted. Silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy or threatening. It was filled with awe, respect, and a quiet realization shared by everyone in the room. The most important voice they needed had been standing there all along, unseen, unheard, and completely underestimated. After the meeting resumed smoothly, Victor asked for a short break, his mind still struggling to catch up with what had just happened. He approached the maid, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, almost unsure. He asked her name. "Amina," she replied simply, meeting his eyes without hesitation. He asked where she had learned Russian, expecting a short answer. Instead, Amina explained she had studied linguistics years ago, earning advanced degrees and certifications, specializing in Russian language and Eastern European cultural communication. She had once worked as a cultural liaison for international firms, helping executives avoid costly misunderstandings. Her career had been promising, she said calmly, until family obligations and sudden hardship forced her to return home and take whatever work was available. She never mentioned her background because no one ever asked, and because she had learned that titles often mattered more than talent. Victor listened in silence, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest, humility. He realized how close he had come to losing everything because he, like everyone else in that room, had judged by appearances, assuming value came with suits and job titles. The break ended, and the meeting resumed with renewed energy. This time, Victor spoke with confidence, knowing every word would be understood. Amina stood quietly to the side, translating seamlessly, guiding the discussion with subtle cultural cues that smoothed every potential friction point. The investors engaged more openly, asking deeper questions, exploring long-term cooperation rather than short-term gain. What had started as a fragile negotiation became a solid partnership. When the meeting finally ended, the deal was signed, stronger and broader than originally planned. One of the senior investors stood and formally thanked Amina, praising her clarity, professionalism, and respect for their culture. Another nodded in agreement, saying her presence had made the difference between failure and success. Victor watched it all, aware that this moment would stay with him forever. As the room slowly emptied, executives congratulated each other, relief and excitement filling the space. Amina quietly returned to her cleaning cart, slipping back into the background as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Victor noticed this time. He watched her move down the hallway, invisible once again to a world that had just benefited from her brilliance. He understood then that leadership wasn't just about commanding rooms or closing deals, it was about seeing people. That day didn't just save a business agreement, it exposed a truth Victor could no longer ignore. Talent doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it waits patiently, unnoticed, until the moment the world finally needs to listen. But Victor wouldn't let that be the end. Later that day, long after the contracts were signed and the investors had left, he asked his assistant to find Amina and bring her to his office. When she entered, she looked uncertain, expecting questions or perhaps a polite thank you. Instead, Victor stood up, gesturing for her to sit, not as a maid being addressed by a guest, but as a professional meeting an equal. He spoke honestly, admitting how close the company had come to failure and how her voice had changed everything. He told her that what she demonstrated wasn't just language skill, but leadership, judgment, and cultural intelligence, qualities his company desperately needed. Victor offered her a position as a senior language and cultural advisor, complete with proper compensation, international travel, further training, and a clear path for growth. For a moment, Amina was silent. Years of being overlooked had taught her not to expect doors to open so suddenly. Then she accepted, her voice steady but her eyes shining with a quiet pride she didn't try to hide. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Amina no longer entered buildings through service doors or blended into the background. She walked through the same hotel lobby where no one once noticed her, this time leading international meetings, briefing executives, and shaping negotiations before problems could even appear. Colleagues who had stepped around her days earlier now listened closely, realizing how much they had missed. The story spread quietly through the company, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Managers began looking twice, listening longer, asking more questions. Victor noticed a shift, not just in productivity, but in respect. And for him, the experience left a permanent mark. He replayed that moment often, the silence, the panic, and the calm voice that rose when everything else failed. He understood then that power and wealth had limits, but awareness did not. He never again assumed importance based on position, and he made it a rule to hear every voice in the room, no matter where it came from. That day didn't just save a deal, it reshaped a mindset. Because the most valuable insight didn't come from the head of the table or the most expensive suit, it came from someone no one thought to listen to. And Victor never forgot that the future of his company, and perhaps his own growth as a leader, had been changed by the most unexpected voice in the room. If this story touched your heart, like this video to support the message. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. And comment below, what lesson did you take from Eli's story? Your support helps these stories reach more people. Thanks for watching.